Hi, welcome to another episode of the NPC Sports podcast. We are at full strength today. Logan has returned from his sojourn in the wilderness. Logan, lovely to see you looking so healthy and vibrant today. Let's hop right in. Patriots offseason. There has been a lot going on. We touched on a lot of the draft stuff last week. But there's just been, I guess, tidbits is the best way to describe the way that the info has been trickling out since the combine began. Set the stage, Dakota, if you want to start us off. Kind of like, what is your impression, or what have been the most noteworthy things that you have seen coming out about the Patriots offseason the last few days?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because this time of the year, you start to get a lot of conflicting information. Like there's one report from a credible reporter who says the Patriots are going to be really heavy on Josh Sweat, and then another says they're not going to be interested. And then you kind of had this sort of media sparring, where not sparring, but there was a report in the Athletic that the Patriots will not be pursuing T. Higgins, and then Mike Giardi of Boston Sports Journal reported the exact opposite thing while sort of couching it saying like no shot at the other reporter, but I have different information. So it's hard to sort of sift through all that. But I think what appears to be sort of the prevailing theme from what's been coming out of this is that Mike Vrabel is, uh, you know, like being really going about this to try and overhaul the roster, even if it means getting rid of a lot of players who, like you'd want to see stay around and develop, like a Cole Strange, right? We look at Cole Strange and think before he got injured, he was showing promise as a franchise left guard, and they've started this moving him to center experiment. But it looks like they're just, if they think they can upgrade at either guard spot or at center, they're going to do it regardless of Cole Strange. Or, they used a fourth round pick on Layden Robinson last year. A lot of people within the organization last season thought he could be a real high level guard in the NFL, and now it sounds like they don't care if he's not Vrabel's guy, and if he doesn't think he's going to be an immediate impact starter this season, then they'll just go in another direction. So I think that we started to hear whispers of this early in the offseason that there could be major um, roster turnover. And the reporting coming out of it sounds like that's going to be the case, and that the sort of main theme is that they're going to target players who are physical, fit what Vrabel likes from a hard-nosed, loving football mentality, which and tough and big, and that makes you wonder whether someone like Travis Hunter would be appealing to them, given sort of his size. And the other big one that I thought was interesting is this. It seems like the sort of the player atop their rankings is the defensive tackle Milton from the Philadelphia Eagles, and that sort of pairing up with what is starting to sound like more doubtful reporting on Christian Barmore that he's going to be available next season. If they still had any confidence that Christian Barmore would be able to come back and be a franchise interior defensive tackle, I wonder whether they would be pursuing someone like Milton so hard. So to me, those two things are related.
Talking about Milton Williams, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't know. I
Um,
got conflicted with Joe Milton in my head.
with Joe Milton, yeah. Um, so I have a question that's kind of rhetorical, but beyond Drake May, is there anyone who is safe on the Patriots roster? Like going into last year,
Christian
uh,
Gonzalez for sure.
Christian Gonzalez, sure. Like your first round picks the last 2 years, I'm fine with that. But because I was having the thought of like last year, if you asked me this time last year, like who's a player that I really wouldn't want them to part with, like my answer would probably be Duggar. And like I don't even feel that way about Duggar anymore.
No,
And
I never felt
so
that way about him. Yeah.
yeah, I bought in the first couple of years of Duggar. I mean, you talk about like physical guys, like that feels like someone who could really thrive depending on how Vrabel used him. It just, but again, after the last 2 years, like for as much as the Patriots like to talk about how they did spend money last year, it was just keeping all these guys in house. So now we're pretty much talking about guys who are still Belichick guys. Like anyone who's here who didn't sign last year now is a Belichick guy. So like super no loyalty there. And after the way they've played the last 2 years, no one's job should be safe. Like the idea that you can't trade Barmore or this or that, it's like everyone except for Drake May and Christian Gonzalez should be up for discussion. And the reality is that a lot of guys the Patriots have that they conceivably would trade have no trade value, so they would have to cut them anyways. So it's not like they really operate much from a leverage point, but at the risk of being short-sighted, I wouldn't even have a problem with a complete teardown of the roster. Even if they had to rebuild and this year was going to be lean, it's like they need a complete organizational overhaul, which I thought should have been in the form of getting rid of anybody with ties to the past iteration of the Brady Belichick Patriots. They obviously have not gone that route with the coaching staff, but they can at least do it with the personnel. So that's, yeah, I am glad to see that anytime an insider talks about who could get moved for the Patriots, it feels like a new name comes up. Like Ramondre Stevenson's name has been out there. Barmore's name has been out there. Obviously, Godchaw's name was out there.
Yeah, it's interesting because like if I was to name like the other players who I think like 0% chance they're gone, it's not necessarily because there's like they should be untouchable. It's just I don't see any way they trade Christian Barmore because the other team would have no idea how to feel about his health and the Patriots would be selling low. So you're just not going to make that deal. Brendan Schooler to me is someone who like there's no way he's leaving because you don't like teams aren't going to trade
Yeah,
anything
get a
for
seventh round pick for a special teamer.
yeah, so you might as well just keep him, right? And he is a good special teamer. So like those guys I don't think are going to go anywhere, but it's not necessarily to your point because they're elite blue chip talents. I mean, even like you look at the receiver room, their best receiver is Demario Douglas, who I still think can be a really, really good player. I mean, he was disappointing stat wise last year, but I think that was more the circumstances around him. But it's like, does Vrabel believe that a guy with that size, who's a liability as a blocker, does he really want to, lock him into a big role, or would he rather, let's say, trade for Jacoby Myers and bring back sort of the bigger slot to New England? So like even some of the best players at their positions, like you mentioned, Duggar, Jabril Peppers, who the off-field stuff we don't know, like you can make cases for and against keeping all those guys, which is why like they're such a strange roster. The last few years, I feel like you've been able to look at them and squint and see like a 9-win team or a 4-win team. And you could go either way on a lot of these players. But to your point, there's really only 2 or 3 guys who you're like, you have to hold on to those guys. The rest, yeah, I think it's open conversations on all of them.
It will be interesting to see what they do with the defense because that goes to tell you like what they believe about the personnel at least. Because if you go back to presumably the reason they wanted to keep a bunch of guys like Peppers would be because the Patriots in what was 2023 did have a largely actually a very good defense. If you consider how much they were on the field, it actually enhances the idea that like they did have a pretty good unit, but they were so woefully bad last year that it's like, was that a Covington problem? Was that just an entire Mayo coaching staff issue? Or was that a personnel problem? Because if we see a lot of the same guys who have been staples of the defense the last few years come back, then maybe you dream about like, all right, well, with an offense that can be on the field for more than 13 minutes a game, this defense is probably going to be better. But if they go and they tear it all down, then it's like, all right, then they truly believe that this is just, they got more out of a group than they otherwise should have a few years ago.
It does feel like it's about an 80% certainty that Stevenson will be gone. I got to be honest. I would love to see him stay though, just because of like the success Vrabel's had out of the running back position. Obviously, Henry is he's going to have success in anyone's system. But especially for the type of runner that Stevenson is. And I agree with you guys about the teardown, but on offense, yeah, you have Drake May. The rest of it doesn't really matter developmentally, but Stevenson might be the only holdover guy that they have on offense that can make a play outside of May. I mean, even if they do end up with Travis Hunter or so it does feel like they're going to need someone who can make who has proven that they can make a play at the NFL level. So he's not prohibitively expensive, especially if the offensive line gets better. And we've seen him do well. I think he was really ruined by that last awful campaign under Belichick, and obviously the dysfunction under I keep saying OJ Mayo. Spicy Mayo. Gerard Mayo. I'm going to be saying Duran Mayo before too long.
Yeah. Well, not to belabor this point, but it's like, all right, so Stevenson's going to be a free agent after this upcoming season, right? So you trade him
I think he has 2 years left. Maybe the third isn't guaranteed. I'll look.
Okay. That in any event, you trade him, you're probably at best getting a day 3 pick. this year, maybe next year. It's like, why, to your point, Ben, like he is one of a few players on that offense who has shown competence at the NFL level. So you might as well just ride it out, because that's like, you get nothing in NFL trades. Just ride out the contract with a guy who, even if he slides to be your number 2 running back or something, it's like he's in his mid-20s. He's been productive enough. Like, to me, he's more valuable to you than he would be in a trade.
Yeah, and on Steve, so I'm just looking at his contract right now. He's signed for this season and 2026. The cap hit this year is 5.5. The cap hit in 2026 is 7.6, and then he's signed through 2028, but he isn't guaranteed anything in 27 or 28. So that's effectively, he'd either be cut or restructured. But on Stevenson, I think he's kind of an interesting case, sort of to encapsulate the whole offseason, which is, how do we? There's so many things we don't know about what Vrabel wants, what Josh McDaniels wants, because I think with Ramondre Stevenson, if you just remove the fumbles for a second, which I know have to be sort of part of the conversation, but he's shown in the past that he can fix that. So I think it's about scheme fit, because I know a lot of people with the team last year thought a lot of the issues he was having was that they were using him incorrectly, and that's why you saw Antonio Gibson look so much better a lot of the time, where Alex Van Pelt wanted to do this outside zone blocking scheme, which doesn't really suit Ramondre Stevenson's strengths. Like, if you're going to have someone that's running that kind of offense as a running back, you want someone who can get outside, and then he sees one lane, plant, and then he goes. And he's fast enough to get through there quickly. That's just not Ramondre Stevenson's game. He's a between the tackles, physical guy, keep the chains moving. And so with Josh McDaniels coming back, do the Patriots go back to having a fullback again, right? Do they go back to more power runs, which I would think suit Ramondre Stevenson better than what we've seen the last couple of years when the Patriots tried to do this outside zone stuff? Or is Josh McDaniels now going to sort of try and also continue to go in a different direction than what we've seen the Patriots running game in the past? Because if he's going to come out and sort of call runs like he did with someone like LeGarrette Blount, I see no reason why Ramondre Stevenson can't have a really good season. But if he's just going to kind of go out and, run one of these modern NFL offenses with outside zone blocking, I just don't think that suits Ramondre Stevenson well. In which case they should absolutely consider trading him.
Well, I look at him too, like thinking. Sorry, go ahead, Logan. You can go first.
Well, I was just going to quickly say, it's funny that they, like, for the last few years have not figured out how to operate with 2 running backs, because literally every other team in the NFL knows how to do that. Like, even thinking back, like Sony Michel was overall a bad draft pick because they drafted him high relative to his skill set. But it did make sense because he had stone hands. They knew they weren't going to be able to get him to catch passes, but they had James White, so they didn't have to worry about it. And it was so easily structured, and the play calling was sometimes predictable based on who was on the field, but both of them were good enough at their respective roles that it made sense. So it's like, yeah, it is obvious that Antonio Gibson looked way better because they were running an offense that was suited for him.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I look at him as is he's like almost a proof of concept. Like why, like the Eagles. I look at what they did. They had the proof of concept with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott,
DeAndre Swift,
and all those kind of guys, so that when it came for that generational free agent to choose where he was going to go, he could look at the Eagles offense and say, oh, I like some of the things they've done here. I could fit in here. And I'm not saying that the Patriots' next big free agent investment should be a running back by any stretch of the imagination, but at least he's another thing that it sounds like they're not going to get T. Higgins or any Chris Godwin, any of these other free agent weapons they're trying to land. But next season is another offseason, and you got to be able to show growth this year for those free agents that either you couldn't get or weren't interested in you this year to be interested in you next year.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind, real quick, if you remove McDaniels' preference out of it for a second and just think, what would Mike Vrabel want? I mean, when he was with the Titans, he absolutely, loved having the big physical lead back and then the smaller, shifty passing down back to spell Derrick Henry. From Dion Lewis when Vrabel first got there. I think Dontrell Hilliard was there, Tyjae Spears in Vrabel's last season. So we're all, again, these sort of smaller passing first compliments to Derrick Henry. So, part of me thinks just run it back with Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson, because it fits Vrabel's history, and it fits what Josh McDaniels did when he was with the Patriots.
This is probably more a question about the offense, but now this whole discussion about like having a built-in system where you can just plug guys in has made me think, what's the bigger contributing factor to the Patriots' woeful play the last few years? The fact that they've had different people leading, a different person leading the offense essentially each of the last 3 years, maybe four. Or is it just that they lack quality enough personnel? But there really hasn't been a lot of structure. There has been a lot of change in terms of, especially around offensive coordinators, that it's like, is there any semblance of productive players on offense that just need stability, like just need a system that's tailored for them, that's going to be around for more than 1 year? Because I think that then changes sort of the blow it all up argument. But I sit there and think, well, if Jalen Polk can't catch a freaking pass with no one around him, I don't care what the system is, he's probably not going to be reliable then.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Before you go, Dakota, I was actually thinking the other day. I think there's a distinct possibility that like we're at the end of October, and a lot of the talk we're saying now about, hey, like the Patriots, the talent cupboard is bare. There's nothing there at athlete, player, personnel wise. I think we could be 8-9 weeks in the season and be realizing that we were maybe not as right about that as we thought, because like yeah, they are at a big talent deficit across the board, but there are like I Keishon Boutte is a useful player. Like we've been talking about Stevenson, obviously Drake.
Yeah,
I
Pop Douglas.
there's a reason that they were considered a player for T. Higgins, because if you plug in, if they get an edge rusher in the draft, if they clear up the offensive line, and if they were able to get an outside threat on offense, all of a sudden you're thinking, well, wait a second, they're maybe not as totally bereft as I think a lot of people are assuming.
Yeah, and I think some things are excuses and some things are fair explanations. And I think for the Patriots, one of the big things was the defense last year. And I think it's absolutely fair just to point out all of the injuries and the coaching turnover. Not having Bill Belichick running it. I think that was a huge part of it. Like people always say, you can't make excuses. Every team goes through injuries. I mean, they had some pretty significant injuries, plus the Matthew Judon trade. So I just think, I think I wouldn't shock me at all if the Patriots defense returns to being very good this season without any major additions. But we'll see. The other
Yeah.
thing,
I
yeah.
just,
Sorry, continue, Logan.
my thing is just like, every year they draft players that you start to get excited about because they have to draft a receiver in one of the first 2 rounds every freaking year. And it's like, I sat around for a while being like, I get why they like Tyquan Thornton. Like, I can see the vision there, but like he never showed you anything. And so last year, like, I went into last season thinking like, this team is going to be bad. There are 2 things I want. I would like to be at least a little bit entertained, and I would like for a handful of guys to just freaking show me something. And save for like 2 games, they were entertaining. The Bengals game being one of them. I thought the season was going to go in a much different direction. But like, who did you watch last year? Like, Demario Douglas is probably a good example. Christian Gonzalez, but the expectation is there that he's going to be a shutdown corner. Like, what player do you look at and say like, okay, it is plausible that they would take a jump this year? Like, I don't disagree, Ben. We might be sitting there at the end of October being like, Javon Baker ended up being a lot more talented than we thought because of X, Y, and Z. But has anything that you've seen from him at the NFL level so far indicated that that would happen? Like, I don't think it's that short-sighted to be in this place right now, because nobody except for Drake May and maybe 5 others gave you anything to, think favorably about going into this season. Everyone has to prove something.
Yeah, I think it's tough. Are there any players in there that I think like they could take a step forward to be like Pro Bowl level players this year? I don't know about that, but like I look at players who like Del Pettis, right? Like they were down the stretch last season, he was an undrafted rookie. I mean, he was their best safety for the last like quarter of the season. And Jabril Peppers, with being the physical player that he is, depending on how that the team feels about the off-field stuff. Like those two guys being, I think, legitimate options. And Peppers is still only like 27 or so. Like, does that facilitate a Kyle Duggar departure? Them cutting Marte Mapu, you know, Marcus Jones, who's I think on the whole before he got hurt at the very end of the year, I think was having a really good season, finally showing the ability in slot corner. So I think there are some players who like I wouldn't be surprised if they truly emerge as legitimate NFL starters, Pro Bowl players. That's probably not. The only other point I wanted to make quickly was Logan, you mentioned the constant change and turnover, like with offensive coordinators and everything. I think the other big thing there that kind of gets overlooked is the turnover at offensive line coach, because really the offensive line coach and the coordinator they go hand in hand. Like they need to complement each other. And the Patriots have had a different one every year since 2019. In 19, you had Scarnecchia. That was his last year. And then in 2020, I believe it was Carm Brasillo and Cole Popovich leading it together. Popovich left because I think he refused to get the vaccine. Then after the 2021 season, McDaniels took Brasillo to Vegas. And then in 2022, you had the Matt Patricia disaster. 2023, you had Adrian Clem, who didn't do a good job anyway, and then left midway through the season for a health issue. And then last year, you had Scott Peters come in and install this whole new strike-based system, and now he's gone, and now you have Doug Marrone. So that's as big of it as anything, and part of the reason why they haven't been able to develop offensive linemen is they have a different coach in their year every season. So you hope finally that starts to change going forward. But again, who knows? Because we don't know how Doug Marrone's going to do.
Yeah, it's very true. All right. We've spent a good amount of time on the Patriots. We'll have plenty of time to dig in a little bit more. But I do want to make sure I move towards MLB, spring training. We've seen a lot of the exciting Red Sox prospects. I don't know that we've seen a lot from the exciting Red Sox prospects.
There's like Christian Campbell.
Yeah. But I want to kind of pose a question to you all, because we have been really Red Sox centric in our attentions. But I wanted to take a step back and look at the Yankees, because obviously any conversation of the Red Sox involves the Yankees and vice versa. And I know it seems silly. One team is coming off a World Series run, the other team was coming off a 500 season. But the question I have is based on where the roster is, where the health is, are the Red Sox in a better position than the Yankees right now today?
Yes, 1,000%.
I'm glad I'm not the only person who feels that way.
Yeah, I honestly think the Yankees are a bit of a disaster. I think the Yankees have lipstick on a pig right now. They they have no help coming pitching wise. So every year they end up with a decimated rotation, and they've thrown a bunch of money at someone like Carlos Rodon, who is unpredictable and historically tumultuous. Marcus Stroman, another good example. And they have so many bad contracts for position players. So like, first of all, they don't know who their third baseman is going to be this year. It should be DJ LeMahieu, but they have their wagon hitched to him through, I think, next year. And he is just completely cooked because of a degenerative foot issue. And then we're really not that far away from a period of time where probably Stanton and Judge are under contract and only capable of being designated hitters. And frankly, like their only way to really build right now, because they have so much trouble with homegrown players, is through free agency. And so they don't really have a sustainable plan long term. Like the only real, like Jason Dominguez, I think he'll be a legitimate, like real deal. The flashes that we saw before he got hurt in 2023 were great. Like, that's fine, but he won't be a generational talent or anything like that. And then there's Spencer Jones, who's the next biggest thing that they're supposed to have, who is a power hitting outfielder. So there's no help coming. They constantly have to patch holes through free agency. So I, as a Red Sox person, would think that like you have much more of a a sustaining system there to where you can. I mean, this offseason was a perfect example. They have plenty of young guys that they seem to trust, and they filled in the gaps with guys like Walker Buehler. You trade for Crochet, you sign Bregman, things like that. But I feel like the Yankees are just going to be chasing free agents every year. And I would be concerned, especially because I think they got exposed for a lot of their flaws last year, even in a World Series run.
Which is ironic because from reports, they're one of the teams that's surprisingly pushing for a salary cap with the next collective bargaining agreement. I mean, if they would be royally screwed from a competitive standpoint if there was a salary cap instituted, because you're right. That their only way out of this right now is to spend their way out.
Yeah,
their top five prospects, real quick. Dominguez is one, and then it's George Lombard, who hasn't played above high A. Spencer Jones, who hasn't played above double A, and Ben Hess, who's played rookie ball. And then Will Warren, who might be their fifth starter, is their fifth prospect. Like, no one is close, especially not on the mound.
Yeah, and I think if we're just talking about like, are the Red Sox in a better position? I think, like, let's just do an exercise. Let's go around the diamond, and I mean we can sort of qualify this.
The lineup, I don't think it's any question whatsoever.
No,
yeah,
no, but I just mean if we go position by position and lumping in the rotation as a whole, like if you go to each one and say which team do you feel better about, and you can sort of make it a combination of current and not long term, but future, meaning like the next 3 to 4 years or so. So like we'll just start first, or catcher, Red Sox, Connor Wong, with Carlos Navarez as the sort of the top depth option, or the Yankees with Austin Wells and Alex Jackson.
Wong. I mean,
I'd probably take the Yankees.
I can save it. I think the only positions where I give the Yankees the edge is shortstop and wherever Judge ends up playing, either center or right.
Yeah, that's
I take Volpe over. I took Volpe over Story.
Yeah, I think. Well, and even then, I think you could argue Volpe, and like if you lump in the potential promise of Marcelo Meyer, you could make an argument for a push there. But you probably go edge Yankees because at least Volpe's done it on the big league level. And then you're right, Judge is Judge, and maybe you give edge Yankees in the rotation, but I'd rather be, as far as the ace, I'd rather be the Red Sox, given the age of Garrett Crochet compared to Garrett Cole. Max Fried is probably, better, I guess, than what the Red Sox have for
Max Fried's great.
But after
the top
that,
of their rotation.
Yes.
Yeah.
The top of their rotation definitely outpaces the Red Sox right now, certainly in terms of pedigree, too. Like, I'm thrilled about Garrett Crochet, but we've seen him do it for 4 months.
And like first base, Paul Goldschmidt or Tristan Cassis. Again, if you're asking me one at bat right now, I'm probably going Goldschmidt, but I'd rather be the Red Sox at that spot. Same thing with second base with Jazz Chisholm and Christian Campbell and Alex Bregman. Like, I'd rather be the Red Sox just about everywhere. And then if you break it down to the farm system, it's not close. Dominguez is the only guy the Yankees have in the top 100, and the Red Sox have 4 in the top 100. So I think across the board, the Red Sox are in a better spot, and they could be better at all those spots except for Aaron Judge relatively soon.
I mean, think about it. They had
so
Rizzo.
Wait, hold on. One real quick thing on Tristan Casas. He obviously opened his mouth. He got slammed for it. But one thing that I feel like didn't get enough attention was he said taking the inside pitch and being able to hit that to left center is the Mount Rushmore for a hitter, and that's not what that term means. So I just wanted to really quick. You mentioned Casas. I just because I don't
hate more than incorrectly used idioms.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone has like raised that. So I'm sorry. I just had to, before I forgot it. You mentioned Casas. I just wanted to interject that. Go ahead.
Well, congrats on being the first and probably only person to give a shit about that. I mean, you look at the Yankees, they had Rizzo last year, who was a complete mess, which was partially because his brain was jelly because they couldn't spot a concussion. But and you replace him with 37-year-old Paul Goldschmidt. I'm looking at their top prospects right now. Their number 17 prospect is a catcher first baseman combo who's only played in double A. They've got another catcher first baseman combo who's their 13th prospect who's only in rookie ball. Like, they have nobody. So they have to trade for all these positions. And we're also talking about guys who are in such low levels of the minors that we have zero idea what they're actually going to be. And so it's not a sustainable way to build a roster, especially with pitching when you have to sign all these guys to 8-year deals who are hitting free agency at 31. Like you're just going to be eating the ends of those deals. And so I have been firmly in the camp for a while that the Yankees aren't winning anything with the way they build their lineup in the first place. But like they're so dug in now on this that they have like the Judge era, the next 5 years is going to be rinse repeat of mid-30s free agents rounding out the roster. And like they're not going to win anything with that.
Now, if the Yankees went out next offseason and signed Vladimir Guerrero Jr., like how
Well,
much
you
do
know
you
how
think
I
that
feel
would
about
change it?
Vladdy.
I love Vladdy. I don't think that solves any of their problems. And
I
this
don't
is
either.
another
No.
thing I was thinking. We were talking about Jason Dominguez and also watching Roman Anthony. What is it with so many players now that cannot play a position? I just think it's
No.
bonkers. You talk, oh, this guy's a can't miss prospect, and then they come up and you have Dominguez who can't catch a fly ball, and Roman Anthony, who I think it looks like a great athlete, but he's doesn't like move particularly smoothly, and I've been really surprised about that. So I feel like adding Vlad Guerrero, okay, just they're gonna add a fourth guy who now can't really play a position.
Who's going to have to be a DH one day?
Yeah, who's he's a little bit better, more valuable in that he can play third, but I don't know how long he can play third.
Well, I think part of it too is the Red Sox are so serious about positional flexibility that it's kind of a double-edged sword for them. Like, it's great that you have guys that can play a lot of different positions and move around, but on the other side of that, you end up having few players that are just truly they lock down and look great at a position. Roman Anthony, he's moved around in all three outfield spots as he's come up. Marcelo Myers played a lot of third, played a lot of short. He's spent time at second. Ceddanne Rafaela everywhere, where it's like, I think all indications are, at least from the scouting evaluations, like Roman Anthony would be an above average left fielder pretty safely. But
Especially
they
at
probably should have
Fenway.
made that call early on instead of making him play center field throughout the minors.
I've got no issue with that because like that saved the Red Sox. Like think about when they signed Trevor Story and they were able to just drop Trevor Story at second and not impact things with Bogarts. Like whether that was the right move or not is a different discussion. But I've got no qualms with being able to put guys anywhere as long as they have a position that like I loved Brock Holt, but you like the only place you could really put Brock Holt long term was like second base. And that's a problem. Because it was just he was confident enough everywhere, but not great enough anywhere. And so there's a point where it's like if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any. If you play 9 positions, you don't play one. But like Ceddanne Rafaela is a great example. If you told me he had to be your everyday shortstop, I'd have my concerns offensively, but defensively, I'd have no issue with that. And it's the same thing with him in center field. So the variability is fine.
Logan bringing up Brock Holt, like I could tell you're just bursting at the seams to talk about Sandy Leone and Sue Lin. Sue Lin,
Did you see? Hold on. Did you see Sandy Leone hit a freaking nuke off the Red Sox the other day?
I did, and I think Sue Lin isn't he like trying to qualify for the World Baseball Classic? Like he's still playing.
I believe so.
Those games are. Have you caught any of those games?
I haven't. No.
Holy mackerel! If you like Bad News Bears baseball, I was watching. I think it was Germany versus China the other day on like YouTube. I was watching it. Oh man, it was a lot of fun.
Hey, I just Googled Zue Lin and the clip is from MLB.com from a week ago saying he nearly hit a grand slam playing for Taiwan.
Man. Okay.
The point I'm actually was trying to make though before Dakota got into the Vladdy trades and whatnot is that like can anyone name aside from Aaron Judge like a quality homegrown Yankee? Like this is a pervasive issue.
Volpe.
Volpe, okay. That's
Yeah.
now apparently he's going to be the next Derek Jeter, but I've never seen him hit
No,
his
see
weight.
that I think Volpe is a useful player. I also kind of hated on him early on because there was all the Jeter comparisons. I think he's a very competent player, and
Yes,
until I see Trevor Story actually stay on the field, I don't consider Trevor Story a member of the Boston Red Sox. Like, he hasn't necessarily played for the team for any consistent period of time yet.
Let me
maybe
ask
this
you a
is because
dead
I always
serious.
think the maybe it's because I always think the Rockies are nice, but like I've given Trevor Story way more passes than I would give any other player, and I have no idea why. But I repeatedly am like, this is going to be Trevor Story's year, and I'm all the way in on it. And it's just with anyone else, I would have been out on him 2 years ago.
I think I give him passes too, just because, and we talked about this a couple episodes ago. I think a lot of his injury problems fall into the umbrella of bad luck. But one last question to go back to what we were saying, like, would you rather be the Red Sox or the Yankees at each position? And this is a dead serious question. Who would you rather have at DH for this season, Giancarlo Stanton or Masataka Yoshida?
Yoshida.
Yeah, Yoshida.
First of all, I think Yoshida's going to be great this year. I'm not a Stanton
Like,
guy. He
forgetting the
strikes out so
contract,
much.
but including injuries, right?
Yeah.
Because Stanton's dealing with
Yeah.
the elbow and Yoshida's dealing with the shoulder. So they're both definitely DHs right now. But yeah, which player would you rather have?
Yeah, I do think that the injury for Yoshida last year was a bigger deal than maybe we realized. But he should be mostly on the mend now, whereas I think Stanton's health, I think, could be that thing that turns into him not playing at all this season. If we're
Yeah.
being totally
Yeah.
honest, yeah,
Like Jacoby Ellsbury.
it's one of those things
I
that
was-
starts like, oh, he has to go home for personal reasons. Oh, he has to go home to get this looked at. Oh, he has to go home to get this injections. Oh, he's not going to be with us opening day. Oh, he might be out of mind. And next thing we know, it's like, all right, see you 2026.
Is exploring
Yeah, I
experimental
almost-
treatments in Germany, kind of.
I almost flippantly said, like, are we even going to see Stanton this year? And it's like, I'm glad you're on the same page because, like, with the way they've been talking about it, there's a non-zero chance that Stanton just disappears this year.
Yeah, and I think just Yoshida, for whatever reason, like, he just keeps getting overlooked, or I think underrated. Maybe because I don't know. He's definitely an awkward roster fit for the Red Sox because he's another lefty bat. He can't play the outfield. Like, he just doesn't fit with what they want to do. But as far as just him actually as a hitter, like, I don't know. I think people rag on him, and I don't think it's justified. I think when he's been healthy, he's been a good offensive player with like really impressive stretches. I mean, the first season,
Yeah.
he was excellent until he clearly wore down, and maybe the World Baseball Classic stuff caught up with him, and he wasn't the same player down the stretch. But for long stretches of the first half, he was their best offensive player. And then last year he was hurt, right? So, like, yeah, I'm high on Yoshida as well. I just don't know how much he's actually going to play for them this year. Like, when
I'm
he's back
glad-
ready to return full time, like, they're going to have a really interesting decision on their hands how they juggle that roster math, because I could see him not playing, even though I think he probably should.
I'm glad you brought up the point about him wearing down because I remember one of the things that the Red Sox literally were warned about from the team he played for in Japan was that, especially when he plays in the field a lot, he will wear down and I think the specific thing I saw was that you'll see his play decline before he tells you that he's too worn down. And they play a shorter season in Japan, and he did tail off at the end of the year. And then you have the injury factor last year. We have seen enough good flashes from him now that he is presumably healthy. The Red Sox should know how to handle him, especially if they're going to continue to refuse to play him in the outfield, that this would be the year. Like, I thought they moved off of Chris Sale a year early because they had already ridden through so many bad years that they might as well wait until he has a normal offseason. That's kind of how I feel about the trading Yoshida thing. It's like, this is probably the year 3 here, where this is the only chance he'll have to, like, recoup his value if you want to trade him. And at that point, he might finally be the bat that Chaim Bloom envisioned when he signed him. You're right, the fit is clunky, but if he's going to be set and forget as a DH, like, I've got no problem with that. There's enough there, especially, and contrasting to the Stanton thing, he hits for contact. He knows how to work a walk. Like, he is a useful enough bat that you've got to see what you have there.
Real quick, his first season with the Red Sox through August 5th, I have it up right here. Through August 5th, he hit 307, he slashed 307, 366, 481. So 307 average, 848 OPS, 12 homers, 54 RBI, 29 walks and just 48 strikeouts. I mean, I'll take that. Again, like I guess you know, it's hard as a Red Sox fan to not think DH without thinking like what David Ortiz could be, or what David Ortiz was, or what Rafael Devers could be. But I mean, I'd take that production. And then again, he tailed off at the end of the season. So, yeah, I think there's still a lot of good offense left in Yoshida if he gets the playing time.
If only there was a place to play him. Yeah, I mean, you guys hit the nail on the head. Ironically, the lineup, a lineup that could really use him is the Yankees. If we're being totally honest, a
Yeah.
left-handed hitter who can work, who can work the count and has a little bit of pop, but not just swinging from his heels the whole time. So
Short porch too. I mean,
yeah.
he'd be great.
Where?
He'd probably boost up to 20 something home runs there if he stayed healthy.
True. All right, I think I had some NBA stuff on the docket. I think let's punt on that for this week though. That's going to be there for a couple weeks as long as that's all right with you guys. But I want to get into our behind this keyboard segment because we are kind of first person examples of the tumultuousness of this industry. And there have been a lot of changes within the last few years, and even I think within the last couple months of the beat reporting, of the sports writing environment in Boston in particular. So I'm curious in talking to the two of you about what you see as the future of beat reporting or traditional sports writing moving forward into the next year, 2, 3, 4 years, not like, not looking way down the line, but just how you think it's going to evolve here in the very near to mid-near future.
You want to start, Logan?
I don't know if this will get too
Sure.
real for anybody, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, maybe I should go first then so Dakota can collect his thoughts. I have to say, I haven't sourced this take to you guys, so I'll be curious your reaction. I actually don't have the biggest issue with scaling back professional sports beat reporting in some ways. Not at the loss of overall coverage or jobs, but to me, it's like, I don't know. Do you really need 3 or 4 baseball beat writers? Like, that's probably the one sport where, because of the grind of the schedule, if you're a major metro paper like the Globe, for example, like they have 3. I think they could probably get away with 2, but 3 is fine. Like, that's the one sport that I think makes sense. To me, you can still cover something well without being a beat reporter. And journalists love to get on the soapbox of like, you've got to be there. You have to, cultivate relationships and this and that, which is all true. And I agree with that. I also think that sometimes the plot gets lost, where at the end of the day, most media companies are trying to save money. An easy way to do that without having to cut jobs is cutting back on things like travel. I think it is justifiable to just send one reporter to something, especially on the road. Have one person committed to a beat for even an NBA team, because you can get help from other reporters when they're at home with practice and things like that. Every sport except for baseball, probably. And it's because we've evolved enough as an industry, and especially within sports, there's so much more information and so many more statistics that just get brought to you, that you can still show up sometimes, not at a beat capacity, and still be good at your job if the analysis is good enough. Like, I think you guys would all probably agree that most of the time, when you're talking about like web traffic, just straight newsers are a means to an end. Like, you have them because you need to publish the news, but they're not usually huge traffic drivers. Like, the things people care about are analysis or opinion and things like that. And yes, sometimes you do have to be on site every day in order to get that. That's still worth the investment. But the idea that you have to have, if you want to cover the Patriots seriously, you got to have 3 Patriots writers. I think that's nonsense. And I think that's something that is going to continue to create loggerheads when it comes to this idea of like hedge funds just want to gut newspapers and media companies. It's like, we know that. So why don't we find ways where the industry works well, that is already cost savings. Because like that's just the reality. I hate it. I wish they were pouring more money into it, but like you have to be practical about the realities of the industry right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of me wonders where I think the pendulum's going to swing hard in one direction here in the relatively near future, thinking about things like AI and cutbacks and stuff. And then I wonder if it swings back the other way when there's a void and people sort of miss the content that they used to get. But I mean, I'm with you. I mean, right away, I don't think like beat travel is long for this world, like at all. At any real outlet. I mean, a few, sure, but I mean, the cost of travel, whether it's planes, hotels, keeps going up, and the revenue in sports journalism keeps going down. So it's just bad business, um, which is unfortunate because I do think you do need to be there to some degree, but it just gets harder to justify when you're just looking at return on investment all the time, and that's what these companies are going to do. You know, in addition to that, I think I really don't think a lot of these websites that aren't behind paywalls are going to make it much longer. I mean, we see a lot of websites trying to move behind paywalls. Mass Live is trying to go behind a paywall. I believe they have some sort of system in place where internal software might sort of decide what goes behind it and what doesn't. Like it's not like everything's going behind, but they're trying to go behind a paywall. But really, I think the ones that stand to make it the best behind a paywall, the Globe and the Athletic. We'll see with the Herald. I think without the reporting that Andrew Callahan and Doug Cotter are doing over there, I don't know how many people would pay to get behind the Herald paywall. Um, they do great stuff over there, so you justify it. But I just think more and more of the websites that haven't made a compelling case for people to pay for their content aren't going to make it, largely because of AI. Like without going too into the weeds, at my own company that I just left, I wonder when that starts to come into play. If not AI, just cheap overseas part-time labor. That was the thing that sort of facilitated my demise over there. Is the parent company, which was international, started thinking, why are we paying for full-time staff to do all this stuff when we can generate just as much traffic with cheap part-time labor over here? And I think a lot of outlets are going to start doing that, and a lot of sort of the aggregation or newsers. I think places, unfortunately, are just going to start leaning into AI. Like we've seen it already at a lot of places. The AI is imperfect enough where you can like people who know what they're looking at can spot the flaws or the errors and the mistakes. And in some cases, they're comical, but eventually and probably soon, they're not going to be any mistakes. And so the only people that are going to justify having the jobs on beats are people that are breaking a ton of news. And I just think the viable employment opportunities for those people are going to dwindle. So like I mean, it's not to be doom and gloom, but I wouldn't be surprised if in like 5 to 6 years, like there's only a couple, 2 to 3 beat reporters covering the teams in each town, and only for a couple of outlets. I don't think the model is gonna last much longer. But then again, like I said, I wonder if the pendulum swings back in the other direction after a while.
Yeah, I think you both make really good points. I mean, Logan, you talking about so much manpower, woman power, person power being dedicated to the coverage. It is good because you have more voices, additional people to look at it, to watch the game, or interview the athletes or the coaches and offer their perspective. I think unfortunately though there's so much groupthink on sports writing social media that you end up just having an additional person on that beat who's parroting the same things that everyone else is saying, and that also leads to issues with the coverage as far as the players are concerned. I have always been interested to see the difference in the type of stories, and the Athletic has been a really good resource in this way because I found out, following the Utah Jazz over the years, where there are maybe 3 to 4 media people that are on that. There's a couple daily newspapers. There's a couple broadcast TV news affiliates, but the stories that those few people tend to get are they seem a lot more personal than anything that comes out of, you know, a Bruins or a Celtics coverage, where there's just so many people. Definitely when you compare to like New York or DC or any of these places. And so I think that that is, you know, sometimes less is more, because if you're an athlete and there's two people there, you know, you feel like you're having a conversation with a person as opposed to a mass of humanity. And then, you know, to the point of like the being there, I think the teams could actually do a lot to remedy a lot of that impersonal time wasting stuff. Like the NFL, which is not perfect by any means, but like the NFL's media setup makes a lot of sense, where like usually the coach talks on certain days, the starting quarterback talks on a certain day each week, you know, the defensive captain, and the, you know, they usually have, you know, a certain day that they speak each week, so you know that it's like, hey, I gotta get a quote from you know, the offensive coordinator this week, you know, oh well, he usually talks, you know, every other week on Thursday or whatever, and you know, to be there, as opposed to, especially with things like that are either daily or almost daily, like basketball and hockey, you know, a lot of times you just go to practice hoping that that's the day that someone of import talks, and instead they come in and they say, hey, today Peyton Pritchard and Al Horford are going to talk, and you're like, well, I just wasted a drive to Brighton, because this is like, you know, so it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, you know, every week, you know, on Tuesday, you know, Jason Tatum speaks at, you know, a certain amount of time. And from what I understand, I did not cover the Big Three at this time. From what I understand, the first couple years of the Big Three, that's actually what the Celtics did. They had like designated days for Ray, KG, and Paul that they would talk, and then after games they would bring the three of them in, like basically as like a mini, like to the podium. So I do think that there are ways that the teams could help with this in a way that not only helps the media outlets but also helps themselves, because it would lead to a lot less of that, like those filler days, whereas a random, oh, it's a Wednesday shoot around and we got to have this thing, oh, Morgan Geeky really likes what the, you know, they've, and it's like, okay, this, I don't care, you know.
Yeah. And I like, you know, all three of us did some level of on-site reporting for Nesson. And I think we would all agree that sometimes it would be a real freaking grind. Like when I was down doing Bruin stuff, most of the time, it's like, you know, for the game itself, never mind anything I do before the game. It was like, there's a game story, there's the wrap, there was a notebook that I do immediately after availability, and then at least two, sometimes three additional separates after the game, whether that was off of interviews, whether that was like an analysis or an opinion piece or whatever. And I'd sit there and I'd think, so someone who works for like the Globe or this place where they've got all these beat writers, they show up, they write one thing and leave. Like I sit there, I'm like, that is the
Don't get me
easiest
started.
freaking gig in the world. And like, you know, there's, so as a journalist, there's part of me that's like, you know what? The easiest thing to do is when you do have more people, like when we have more people at the cup final, it was like I was able to watch the game and I noticed I saw things a little bit better sometimes. So it's like there is that material benefit to it. But at the same time, it was like I was still by myself perfectly able to fulfill that job. And so I'm all about like, yes, get the color, focus on it, like all that. But again, as a practical matter, it's like, do you really need three or four people who are only going to write one thing when you already sent one person down there? You just don't need it. And so one of my like guilty pleasures is whenever a team that I follow goes on the road, like the Patriots are a good example of this because the Patriots traveling beats bigger than any other in the city. I like looking at the coverage that people who are on site did on Monday morning, Tuesday morning, like once everyone's back, and say, what of this could they have accomplished with only one person traveling or something? Like sometimes people would go and travel and it's like they were doing it just to check the box. It's like, do something that showed me it was worthwhile for you to be there. Like, but whenever, you know, I see 27 people travel to San Francisco for 2 weeks because, they were going to play in California or whatever, and all the coverage is the same. If I were their editor, I'd be like, why did we just spend all this money to send you there? And you can't get, like, it's so important for you to be there, but you can't get anything different from anyone else. Like, that means you are doing something wrong with your job. If it's that important to be on site, which in a lot of ways it is, you've got to be able to do something distinguishing, and not enough do.
Yeah, and the other thing to add to that, Logan, is a lot of times, so like when we would have multiple people at a big event, we would talk, we would communicate. Logan would be like, "Hey, I'm gonna talk about like the fourth line," and Dakota would be like, "Hey, I'm gonna do something on the goaltending," and I'll be like, "Hey, I'll do something on like that power play in the second period." So like you're not totally stepping on each other's toes. To your point, when those 14 people travel for a Patriots game, one columnist is writing about the defense, another columnist is writing about the defense. The main game story is about the defense. And I'm like, did you guys not communicate when you were there? Like, did you never like talk in the press box? Like, hey, I'm going to do this angle. Oh, maybe I should rework my angle so that we're not just having 8 stories on Monday morning that are all about exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Real quick, Logan, on your point about watching other people on other beats only doing like one story or two max from these games, and how frustrating that would make you feel. It has often doing upwards of 8 or more at these events. I mean, I'll never forget. And it's one of those things like, woe is me. Like I got to go out west and follow the Patriots for 10 days, but like I'll never forget the week the Jacoby Myers failed lateral game against the Raiders. That was a game. That was a week where we went out to cover the Patriots for a Monday night game against the Cardinals, and then they spent the week practicing in Tucson at the University of Arizona. So we covered that too, and then at the end of the week flew to Vegas for the Sunday night game against the Raiders. So I'm already, I'm pretty. I don't sleep well when I travel, so I was pretty sleep deprived. Again, like first world problems, but it was nevertheless it was an exhausting week writing like 8+ stories a day, and then that game happened, and I have the newser or the sort of game wrap or whatever just about done when the Raiders, because people always focus on the lateral, but the like the Patriots had the lead like that whole game, and then they let the Raiders drive down for game tying drive in like 2 minutes when they shouldn't have. So I had to nuke the whole thing. Then the lateral happens, and I mean the sheer like panic that set in thinking about how much work I had to do over the next 4 hours. And the thing about covering those games in Vegas is you go down the media elevator, and the visiting locker room is on the other side of the stadium. It's so far. You don't like they should most stadiums, it's just like basically right there. This one, it wasn't, and it was my first time there. So I'm asking security guard, I'm like, where the hell is the Patriots locker room? I have to get in there to talk to see Jacoby Myers. And he's like, it's on the other side. And I'm like, can I run across the field? He's like, I'm not gonna stop you. So I'm like like booking it across the field, and the stadium's still half full. And I get over there, and again, like all the fallout, and then I'm probably there another like 4+ hours, wrote like some 8, 9 stories, I don't know, whatever it was. And then you see some people leave, and I think they wrote one thing and left. And so there were so many times where things like that happened when I was so drained and gassed, and then you just see people that don't do as much, and then you wonder like, how sustainable is that? How long is what you're doing, what you got out of this trip, both from a return on investment standpoint and just as a pure content standpoint? How viable is that going forward? And I'm doubtful of it.
That's one of those things that drives me up the freaking wall as an editor. Is it's like, that's a great story, Dakota. And you know what I would say if I was your boss? I'd say, why would you even go to Jacoby Myers? Like, everyone's going to have that sound. It's like, who else can you go to? Like, that's the other thing that kills me about sending 27 people. There should never be more than one of someone from an outlet at a scrum. And it's like, you got 27 people next to Jacoby Myers. It's like, who else is going to talk that can lend some sort of insight, because you know that you're going to all the questions of Jacoby Myers are going to be the same in that moment.
Well, and to your point, if I remember right, I think because that season I was tracking how all the stories performed on the road because I was trying to justify it like the travel. And I remember I think the highest traffic story that came out of that whole thing is when I was leaving the locker room because I walked back across the field. I noticed Julian Edelman was there and he was like right by the tunnel in the stands, and Jacoby Myers went up to him and was like crying and gave him like a hug. And I think me and Zach Cox, who was with me on the beat at the time, we're the only ones who saw it. And I went upstairs and I wrote like a 200 something word story on like Jacoby Myers embraced this Patriots legend after heartbreaking finish. And it did the most traffic. So to your point, yeah, it had nothing to do with what was actually in the locker room. It was an outside the locker room observation.
Yeah. It's a really weird spot because I'm not like again, I think we would all agree that the way we did things at Nesson sometimes like really contributes to burnout. Like when I
Yeah.
got to Odyssey, I was like, I need like 6 freaking months off from writing, like after this. So it's not always sustainable to do it that way. But like there can be a middle ground between writing one thing and writing 8 things every time you go to a game or whatever. So it's, I hesitate to take a position of like do less or of send fewer people or whatever, but you can still like you don't have to be on site all the time to do a good job.
Yeah.
Like
And
you can.
the last like sort of point or thing I'll say about this is to sort of bring it back to like what's behind the paywall and what isn't. Like, if you're not one of the few places that's like established enough and well funded enough and of high quality enough to make it behind a paywall, you're going to be one of these websites that's reliant on ad impressions, right? And I'm probably veering into Ben's territory here because he's been like a manager on this level. But regardless, the metaphor I've always used for a sports website that's not behind a paywall is kind of like running a restaurant, right? Like I grew up working in restaurants, and it was always fascinating that, if you're at a bar, what do you think is the top revenue driver at basically every bar in the country?
Beer.
Beer and wine.
Yes, Bud Light specifically, right? So you can be the fanciest lounge with all the fanciest cocktails and wine that you want, and you're not going to stay open unless you're selling Bud Light. Same thing in the kitchen. You can have as all the coolest entrees and steaks and fancy food that you want. If you don't have burgers and fries and Bud Light, you're not keeping the lights on. So for sports websites, you have
That's
to.
the most white bread American take I think I've ever heard
But it's true
from
for a sports
you.
So
website.
I'm
You
looking
have
for
to
my
do.
American flag.
You
So
got to
wave
do
it.
the Bud Light and fries, right?
It,
Like
it has to have a "Don't tread on me" flag, and that's
no, but yeah, I'm just saying if you're at one of these sports websites, like you got to do like you can sort of bring people in with your high level reporting and these great features you do, but you're not going to make it unless you're churning out a ton of beer and fries. And by that I mean these quick, high volume stories. And so how I think that ends up translating to people on a beat is to what Ben was talking about earlier. It's you want to eventually keep your job and justify your job, and so it's hard to not eventually fall into box checking where it's like, all right, the week's coming up. I know I get, whether I want to or not, I get Dietrich Wise on Wednesday. I get the quarterback here. I get Belichick here. I know I can do the injury report this many times. And you start doing the math like, all right, I'm up to like 25 or so, 25, 30. And how much room do I have left over for stuff that's of maybe of a higher caliber, but is more time consuming? And just inevitably, if you're one of the places that owns or is running the website, you're going to look at it and say the stuff we're getting return on investment on are these other stories, right? Not the stuff that's really time consuming. And unfortunately, that stuff that does drive most of the traffic and revenue ultimately is, I think, going to be able to be replaced by AI. So I just think it's going to be hard for a lot of those kind of outlets that aren't behind the paywall to still have beat reporters. I just think it's eventually just going to be the high legacy places behind paywalls, and I just don't know how many of those are going to make it either. Bud Light and fries.
I was gonna say, so I took a flight recently. This has nothing to do with sports coverage, but it does have to do with Bud Light. I took a flight recently, and on my way back, I went to like a restaurant in the airport to get something to eat, and this guy comes and sits down, and he looks at the menu, and he's like, and the waiter comes over. He's like, "Can I help you?" And the guy's like, "So you got burgers? Are any of these grass-fed beef?" And the waiter's like, "I don't know, honestly. I don't think so." And he goes, "Okay." He goes, "How about the salmon? Is that wild caught or is that farm raised?" And the waiter's like, It's like we're at an international airport. I'm fairly certain this is farm raised. The guy's like, farm raised fish is literal poison. It's literal poison. It should be illegal for you to serve that to people. And the waiter's like, okay. He's like, can I get you something to drink? And the guy's like, you have any beer that's not Bud Light? He's like, all I see is like Bud Light and like, Coors Light or whatever. And the waiter's like, he's like, we have, I don't know. He said some IPA. The guy's like, I'll just have water. So like the waiter goes, and then like I see the guy sitting there just looking at the menu, hemming and hawing. And finally the waiter's come back. He's like, hey, he waves him down. He's like, you know what? I'm good. I'm fine. And he gets his stuff and he gets up in a huff and he leaves. So there's no point to that story. It was just one of the I was people watching in the airport and it had to do with Bud Light. So
what's the Dave Ramsey line? Rice and beans. Rice and beans, burgers and fries.
It's literal poison.
Yeah,
it should be illegal.
Literal poison. Yeah.
Yeah.
All that to say, don't send too many writers to one thing. My thing is just it can be both. Like you can be on site sometimes, but not have to go every day. It's like, why do you need to demand that your company fly you to Oakland so that you can go and watch the Red Sox do 3 games in June against the A's? It's you have to be getting Pulitzer level stuff for that to be justifiable. And it's just, to me, there's too much box checking at this point.
Well, and here's the thing is the problem is there is a value in that, but it doesn't show up on a spreadsheet, right? Like from a content standpoint, you can make it a value. The way I try to do it is I was like, like I said, I was tracking the stories that came out of travel on-site coverage. And I was just like, if I asked a question and it led to a story, then that counts because I can't assume that somebody else would have asked that question or an observation, or whatever. But I don't know, I lost my train of thought.
All right, final word on this because we got places to be, people to know. So any final words on this before I put the cap in it for this week's episode?
If you have to constantly scream about how important it is for you to be on site, then you need to find better ways to diversify your coverage.
Oh, yeah. The point I was going to make, sorry, now it came back to me, is just that the real value in most cases is, whether it should be this way or not, a lot of the sort of PR or communications departments for these teams, they will sort of give priority treatment to the people that not only come all the time and don't skip Friday availability in town, but are on the road, right? Those are the people that'll be, they'll probably grant, if they say, can I get an off the record with the coach? They'll help them out. It just helps to have a good relationship, and you do a lot of networking, you forge a lot of relationships on the road. And a lot of times down the road, that manifests whether in really well-sourced content or whatever, but it takes a while to get there, and it still isn't going to show up on a spreadsheet. And if it doesn't show up on a spreadsheet, why are these places going to continue to pay for it? So like I said earlier, I just don't think the travel thing, especially sending multiple people, I just don't see how it lasts.
Great. All right. This has been another amazing episode of NPC Sports Podcast. We'll surely talk about this more in the future. Like I said, there was even some other stuff that I was planning to get to today, but we were just humming along so well on the Patriots and the Red Sox. It ended up getting bumped, so we will get into that next week. But for Logan, Dakota, I've been Ben. Thank you very much for joining us in another week, and we'll catch you later.